It's Halloween time, baby. And what could possibly be scarier than part 3 of a video series with rapidly declining viewership? Ooh. So let's start before I pee my pants because I'm so scared for the future of my channel. So in the last video, we covered the trigger mechanism. Don't look, you gotta watch the whole video, okay? I need the views. Today we'll be going over this wonderful, gorgeous gun stock, or not gun stock, I guess, but you know, kind of rifle-y kind of style, as well as the trials and tribulations of the experimental 2-prod block and tackle sort of thing I got going on here. Some of which I'm still kind of going through, but as you can see, it doesn't mean this thing doesn't absolutely rip. It works very well, I just want it to work even better. So here's where it all began. Right now, I don't really have access to really thick hardwood. I'm basically relegated to whatever Menards has in stock. So I had to make do with a couple of 3/4 inch hickory boards. This stencil here, the front half, the weird looking bit, I just kind of had to freestyle for my own purposes, but the bottom half, the real complicated part, I got from this BB gun, or air rifle. I am an adult. Just a really nice, comfy stock. I thought, why reinvent the wheel? And I really like that cheek pad too, so I copied that as well. I used this really cheap double-sided tape to temporarily stick the 2 boards together. This is not that really expensive double-sided, like, gummy type tape. This is that really cheap stuff that you use to put the plastic around your windows. Now, you're gonna see me cut this out with a jigsaw, and if you're gonna use a jigsaw, I would really highly recommend that you use the factory edge of the board as the track for your crossbow, especially cutting through really thick hardwood like this. You can cut the most perfect straight line ever, but then when you turn your board over and look down the top of it, the top of your cut is all warped and wavy because the jigsaw blade will actually twist and warp trying to follow the grain of the wood, and you may end up finding that trying to flatten that out afterwards, you end up removing so much material that the tolerances don't fit your trigger mechanism anymore. So for a lot of reasons, utilize that factory edge. There's really no reason not to. Here I'm tracing out that cheek pad as well as what the final shape of the butt of the stock is going to be. Now guys, new favorite tool attachment alert. You know me, I'm always ranting and raving about polyfan flap discs and just flap discs in general, but for hardwood like this, the flap disc was not it, chief. It was just burning the wood more than anything. But guys, for removing a substantial amount of hardwood like this, here is the answer. These fiber discs with that backing pad, congratulations, your problems are reversed now. The hardwood's not taking too long to carve now. Now your issue is that your angle grinder is vaporizing hickory. Now you're trying to sculpt a gun stock out of styrofoam with a lightsaber. That's the kind of problem I like having. Now, if you go to the finer and finer grits with the fiber disc, you can get close enough to your end product, but you will have to run over it with the orbital sander and smooth it all out. And if you're not just gonna paint it, if you plan on staining it and putting a finish on it, you're also probably gonna wanna go in sanding it by hand with the grain to get rid of all the cross checks from the orbital sander. But yeah, all this sculpting was done in a day. Just another thing I've had in my garage since I was a little baby that I was so stuck in my ways that I never even thought of using it. And now it's one of my favorite tools. Feels good. So with the shaping of the stock finished, I'm gonna cut out a couple of slots to accommodate the prods. You may notice this time around, I'm not welding up a giant honking frame to accommodate these limbs. I don't know if in the prototype version, I just dramatically overestimated the strength of the limbs or super underestimated the strength of the wood, but I genuinely had this idea that the limbs would like crush the wood in between the prods. Pretty goofy. So I welded up that whole frame, and the frame itself was like 5 pounds, which that's not way too far off from what the full weight of a crossbow is supposed to be. But then you add the prods to it and it was like 11 pounds, and that's not even counting the stock and the foregrip. So yeah, we're better off without the big frame. We don't need it. I get to peel the 2 halves apart, very satisfying. Now I'm gonna clamp the 2 halves back together with a couple of pieces of scrap wood in between. This gives me enough space to drop a router bit in there so I can carve out a little groove for the fletching. This is the first crossbow I ever made that accommodates a 3 fletching bolt. In fact, as you may have surmised from literally seeing it in the intro, this thing fires real store-bought 20-inch bolts with a slight overhang, so it works with broadheads too. I've been too bashful to say it up until this point, but my ultimate goal is to create something that I can actually hunt with. There, I said it, okay? Anyways, router bit, here's a cool little trick. If you don't tighten down the retention screw all the way, it'll pop out and you can gouge the wood. Pretty cool. Not really what I needed for this build, but now you know. Put it back in, screwed it in real tight, worked just fine. Now the really exciting part, scooping out the hole for the trigger mechanism. This is actually pretty simple. You mark out the width of the trigger box. The trigger box I made is rectangular, so I can just continue those lines right over onto the other half of the stock too. I set the depth of the cut of the router to half the thickness of the trigger box, and I just kind of get to scooping. I put a couple of scrap pieces of the same hickory that I cut the stock out of on the sides right here to stabilize the router. Again, I didn't tighten something here. Kind of gouged this part of the wood too. At least it's hidden, I guess. Oh, here's something I like. I got a handy roll of sandpaper strips, and you can just lay the strips on a metal file. It's like a rechargeable emery board, basically. I'm just so full of handy dandy tips for you. Very nice fit, nice and snug. I did not consider the extra little bit of thickness that painting the trigger mechanism would add, so I would have made this a little teeny tiny bit looser, but you know, nothing a flooring mallet can't help. Now, right before I glue the two halves together, this part's gonna be a lot easier if your stock is still in two halves. I'm drilling the holes now that the bolts are gonna go through to hold the trigger mechanism in the stock. Of course, I very carefully mark out my holes to drill, making sure the holes and the bolts, of course, are clear out of the way of any moving parts. I drill and thread these holes. Clamp the trigger box back into one half of the stock. Drill very carefully with a smaller drill bit. You don't wanna drill out those threads, just to mark the holes so you can remove the trigger box and drill through with the full-size bit. Teeny tiny bit of tear out. Womp womp. Clamp the two halves back together. Same deal from the other side. Now your bolts can pass all the way through. Very, very nice. This is the first time I get a really good look at what we're really working with here, and to be honest, me like everything's still moving real nice. Glue this bad boy up. I didn't have any popsicle sticks or whatever to spread the glue, so I used the popsicle sticks God gave me. Just so many clamps. I definitely had some trouble keeping the two pieces aligned. Thinking about it now, I don't know why I didn't think to pass the bolts back through the two holes. I don't know. If I could do this over, I probably would have used hose clamps instead. Seems like having a clamp wrapped around the thing instead of squeezing it like this would actually keep your two pieces lined up with each other. Well, something, candies and nuts. The next day, scraping the glue out, get as much of this off as you can. Even take an orbital sander to it, because any glue that's still on there is gonna block your stain from absorbing. Just totally ruin any hopes of making a professional looking product you might have had. To finish up the aesthetics of the trigger box, in my culture it's customary to spread strawberry cream cheese on your trigger boxes. And if you leave it out in the sun long enough, it'll harden, and when you sand it off, it'll actually fill in all the little pits that you have left over from making your trigger box out of a rusty piece of garbage. It's real nice when tradition and utility meet in the middle like that. I did just one coat of paint on the inside just to prevent any rust. I think I did maybe 4 coats on the outside. It's not a bad looking part, gotta say. All right, with that looking nice, we're gonna get some stain on the stock. I don't know, man. I've never had that much success staining hickory. You'll see here, even totally dousing it in this pre-stain, and I put the stain on it real thick, and I just leave it on there for the longest time. This is ebony wood stain, so on the can it shows the wood grain basically black, and then it always ends up looking kind of like that. In fact, exactly like that. Which, look, in the sense that it kind of looks like I put the bark back on the tree, that's fine. Good camouflage, I guess. But definitely not what I'm usually like going for. So let me know in the comments what the heck is wrong with me. Sure, I don't have to tell you twice. Some threaded inserts in the bottom to lock the limbs in place. I keep saying limbs, I mean prods. I made prods out of fiberglass. I did, I really did. And if it weren't for this block and tackle pulley thing, these limbs would actually be decent limbs. Prods. So, you know, I'll gloss over how I made them real quick in case you want to make a normal crossbow. 2 sheets of 1/4-inch plywood. I glued them together and I bent them over this 2x6. So when the glue dries, it holds that shape. Now I coat it in packing tape so the resin doesn't stick to the wood. Now the first prods were such a fail, they didn't even make it to prod hood. I used probably 30 layers of this really thin fiberglass. It was in a roll and it was the perfect width, so I was like, this will be great. Way too thin. Did all these layers. I also really screwed up with the clamping. Absolutely no clue what I was doing. I put all these screws in. The problem was not that I screwed in through the fiberglass, but the screws tightened down so tight that it literally curved the plywood the short way over the limbs, so it created this big bubble in the top. Cracked it open, checked it out, totally unusable. The big bubble, of course, but it was also just paper thin. Just would not have the power that I'm looking for. Now I was not trying to do like 60 or 90 layers of that really thin stuff. So a little blast from the past, I went back to Old Faithful, the fiberglass welding blanket. Same stuff I used for the bullet resistant armor plate. Just let me do like half the layers but get even more thickness than the other stuff. Not quite as convenient because you got to cut the rectangles out instead of just cut strips, but it makes the fiberglassing itself a lot more convenient, so I definitely prefer this. Also did a much better job with the clamping this time. I used spring clamps instead of screws. The clamps here are actually clamping down on the fiberglass, not next to the fiberglass, creating a bubble. And when you put like a billion of them on there, you get plenty of really consistent clamping power. So the results were really pretty good. There was a slight, very superficial bubble. Seemed like it was right at the surface. Felt good enough about this thing to proceed with cutting it out and shaping it and everything. Only for, oh my gosh, this. Ugh, this crushed my soul. That hurt. That discouraged me. That discouraged the heck out of me. Tail is oldest time, and I told you guys this 100 times. I always super duper underestimate the mechanical advantage against the draw weight of this pulley setup. It multiplies your draw length and your string speed a pretty substantial amount, but I think this particular setup with the pulleys is a 4-to-1, so it cuts your draw weight down to a quarter of what it normally is. Your 100-pound limbs are functionally now 25 pounds. So I internally shed a tear, went all the way back to the store, bought another thing of resin, the Bidenomics Special, one for the price of two, made up some extra thicky prods, and hey, they're better. 100% they're better. You see, I get very excited here because my frame of reference is. But upon further review, as I said, I was hoping to someday be able to take something like this hunting. And as excited as I appear to be in these shots, this is only like maybe 14 yards. So that means at 30 yards, it's roughly gonna take this long between the sound of the crossbow firing and the bolt hitting. More than enough time for the deer to duck the shot. So I wittedy-gwitted my teeth, got a 1,000-pound leaf spring, and I carved these bad boys out of them. Sculpting a curve into a leaf spring is a lot of work. But I'm telling you, man, after all this effort, I needed to see an arrow go fast, bad. Thank the Lord this satisfied the need for speed. I'll be honest, it's still pretty heavy. Not remotely as heavy as that original one, but this is still not something I would take hunting. I gotta figure out how to get the speed of the steel, but with the fiberglass. I have some ideas, probably next time. Oh yeah, but Eli, what about everything you skipped? I skipped it. The string stoppers, the aluminum rails, the scope, the mounting thing for the drawstring. After that one fail, I was just so out of energy for filming. I'm just like, I just want to build for a little bit. I don't want to film this stuff. I want this thing to work. I want it to be good. And I got all that stuff done in like 2 or 3 days because filming makes everything so much longer. So yeah, I'll probably explain all that stuff in the next video. There you go, guys. Hope you're enjoying the build so far. I do tend to get frustrated after a build is lasting consecutive months, but please don't take that as me not enjoying this. This is one of the most aesthetically pleasing and functional builds that I've really ever done. It is very satisfying to feel like I'm getting better and like I'm developing skills. So I'm not mad, just disappointed. Nah, I'm not disappointed. I'm just excited for it to be done. Yeah, that's good. There you go, guys. I'll make an update video if my idea for the fiberglass prods ends up going well. That being said, thank you all very, very much for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye.